Hi, everyone. I'm Karen MacNeil, author of the Wine Bible, and this is winespeed.com's People to Know insider interviews with the most important and fascinating people in the wine business. And in honor of the 4th of July, we're joined today by Daniel Shanks, the former director of food and beverage for the White House. Shanks, who is originally from the Washington, D.C. area, worked as a longtime manager at Napa Valley's Domaine Chandon restaurant, Étoile. In 1995, he was hand-selected to be an assistant usher at the White House during the Clinton administration. Shanks has overseen food and beverage operations for multiple administrations since that time, creating wine and food pairings for state dinners for over 20 years. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you, Karen. I appreciate the introduction. Thank you.
What an exciting life you have had here. Do you remember the first wine you ever drank?
Truth, yes. My family would have Matus and Lancers on the table in the evening. I'm sure more for the bottle and the color than for anything to do with the wine. But that was our first experience. It's something we're very comfortable with. Never really got to become involved deeply in wine until hitchhiking out to California, falling in love with Napa Valley in 1970, and then becoming immersed in the industry there through working restaurants and just living up valley.
My goodness. Well, you know, I'm dying to ask you this question. Do you remember you must remember getting the call from the White House, or I don't know, was it a letter? I mean, how were you approached?
Shaft of light from the heavens, no kidding. I was very fortunate. The committee that had been assembled to select Walter Scheib, the first American chef of the White House after the Clintons came in, Mrs. Clinton tasked them with finding somebody to work on the front of the house, the presentation, the style. The White House, of course, has this mystical reputation, but in fact, it's a very closed off old home that's followed tradition, actually more followed footsteps than tradition in its own path for years and years. When the Clintons came in, and their social secretary is very knowledgeable about events, they weren't absolutely happy about what they saw and how things were. So they did sort of a national search looking for someone to do that sort of, as they described it, informal formalness that so fits what they thought the White House should be. In California, of course, that's our trademark back in the days of the start of California dining. And at Chandon, I think we had managed to pull that off pretty well, giving people the sense of elegance and prestige, and at the same time in a very nice, loving California winery manner. It was a nice compliment. As I mentioned, that committee, one of the people on it lived in Napa Valley. I knew her, and she was fortunate enough to give me a call saying, be aware of the fact you're getting a call from the White House, be ready to handle it. So I got to admit, I got a head start on it. It's not a call you expect to get. And truth of the matter, no matter how much I'd worked as hard as I did and the reputation of the restaurant, you still never expect to qualify to be up to that prestigious a level.
Yeah, you know, I remember when Étoile opened at Domaine Chandon, and you're right. It really established sort of a new standard in informal but very professional California service. It was a remarkable thing. Well, then you get the call, and I'm assuming you have to go and interview. What was the interview process like?
Well, the Clintons didn't know that I was from the Washington, D.C. area. So they invited me back right about the time of the Christmas holiday events at the White House. And I figured I would go back home and surprise family and go to the White House and meet some people and have a great experience, and then come back in time to start when we reopened in February at Chandon. I was very happy in Napa Valley, obviously loving everything we were doing, but you can't pass up an opportunity like this. So I went, and it was the day that they were doing some of the Christmas entertaining. Had an interview for about an hour with the chief usher, and then for about a half an hour with the social secretary. And then the chief usher did a nice thing. He said, you know, you seem like you might handle this. Why don't you follow me? Took me to one of the receptions, and this is back when the president and Mrs. would sit on a sofa with a host of kids in front of them and read them a Christmas carol. So here I am, my first day in the White House, never having been there, sitting here, almost feeling like an outlander, and watching the president and Mrs. doing something so personal and warm and to see the reaction of everybody and to see the hype and anticipation and all of the adults in the room, it just gave me a feeling that this is really something I would like to do. We like to call it America's Table, and there's really no way you can deny, if you're in this business, the opportunity to be any part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, I'm thinking about, so after you accept and you're now at the White House, tell us a little bit about how you went about choosing wines and the steps that you took, because, you know, you had to really, I'm sure, think very deeply about, you know, what wine and how to make these state dinners really warm, but perfect in a sense.
It was an interesting process. In the restaurant world, if there's something that isn't right or a decision needs to be made, you make it now and you make it correctly, because if people in the seats aren't happy, they won't be filling the seats at your next service. The White House operates in a whole different world. I actually had to wait for 2 months and came back for 2 other interviews before they finally decided to offer me the position. In our world, I was kind of going, well, if this is the way they think about me, I guess they don't want me. But it's not that at all. It's just the way the White House moves. They're more interested in ensuring that the integrity and the service and the comfort of the family is protected than any really total change or movement in how the house does its practices. Going to the wine selection, I had a very excellent wine list at Domaine Chandon. John Wright, the president, was very comfortable letting us have a good wine list, even though we were a sparkling wine facility. He knew that was too narrow a concept for a restaurant of that quality. So here I had put all these wines together, had spoken to all the winemakers, taken the staff on winery visits and tours and lunches to speak to the owners and the winemakers. We always would bring the front of the house and the back of the house on these Tuesday afternoon when we were closed excursions, because you sit down and you're listening to kitchen people use one vocabulary and front of the house people using a different vocabulary, speaking about the same experience. It really gave us an understanding of each other. So out of this immediacy, I walked back into the White House, was informed that, well, I know I was told I was there to bring change, but that's not really what that meant. It's going to take me a long time to understand the White House and how it works. And that was true. Gary Walters, the chief usher, is a very gracious man. He had been the chief usher there for 27 years. He was only the 12th in line of succession since 1843. And Devers in the Reagan administration had set up David Berkeley as the conduit for the wine service at the White House. That long distance relationship of first ladies would know a meal. They would send out to David what it was. He would assemble wines, send them back for them to taste. You know, they had that time and that process. You get to the Clinton administration, everything is very immediate. Their entertainment schedule was very heavy, very rapid, and very fluid. So they wanted somebody in-house that could make the wine decisions. Well, that wasn't something that was going to be relished and put in my hands too quickly. It took me 9 months before Gary finally decided, okay, I may know enough that maybe I can order a lunch wine. And all you do is shake your head. So from that, I understood the gravity of what was going on, just the intense desire to never have anything go wrong with the first family. And then Karen, following up on your question, you think in your mind, knowing wines, what wines right off, you can put a list of 20 wines that you will serve at any meal in any restaurant, and you know they're going to be a rock hit. It wasn't a matter of what wines I thought were great. What wines were going to fit in the White House. Like any wine steward, my task then was to choose a wine that would fit the environment and the people that are dining and having the experience. The White House is not a Domaine Chandon or in Little Washington or French Laundry. They're not there for the food. That's a humbling thing for a restaurant person to understand. And chefs dealt with it at the White House quite wonderfully. They're there to be close to the President of the United States. So we could have gotten away with very safe, very conservative choices. People wouldn't have remembered the menu or the wines, but they wouldn't have been offended by it, which is the main thing. And we could have just progressed. Both the chefs, Walter and then Chris, who followed up, were very dedicated to pushing the envelope as much as we could, and yet encompassing all the taste of all the people that were in the dining room. I mean, you can imagine a state dinner between the politicians and the CEOs and the celebrities, and not all of them have the same realm of dining experience that we in the high-end restaurant business were used to. Because of that, you then look at the people and the time and the place, and choose a wine that has the capacity first to match the energy and the enthusiasm. Because when people do a large meal at the White House, they're wound like a Stradivarius. I mean, you could not tune them any finer. And you see it in their eyes. You see entertainers basically ready to be ill at the thought of entertaining in front of the president. So you take that into consideration. You take the second factor, which is the time of service. For a state dinner, you have 130 people in the state dining room. The guests come in, they go through a receiving line, come into the dining room. All the white wine is pre-poured. The first wine of the evening is pre-poured because they didn't want staff in the room while guests were mingling and talking to allow them a sense of privacy. So, of course, that mandates what wine you use, how will it maintain temperature, how will it handle that time. President Clinton was never on time for anything, so you have to have a wine that encompasses changes in schedule. So the wine's there, the guests come in, they sit around, they mumble. Then the head of state comes in with the guest of honor after the receiving line, and they go to the podium and each give a gracious speech of introduction and thanking us for being there. They sit down, we come out of the kitchen and immediately serve the first course. Then at that point, when I first got there, the wine, the main course wine would be poured after the main course was down. I changed that to be poured right as the first course was being finished so the guests could enjoy it in that lull time between the transition. But that lull time wasn't what we expect. The butlers would come out with the next course, pick up that course and put the next course down. There's just no great parade of clearing the table and then this army, this brigade coming in to put down the plates. You can imagine the time and the freneticness about this. So they got the main course, come out with the same thing, switch out the dessert course. Towards the end of the dessert course, we would pour the sparkling or dessert wine. They would come out, present the dessert, and especially in the early years, that was done in a very beautiful platter presentation, so everybody served themselves. Then the strolling strings would come in. Marine musicians in their beautiful red uniforms would play 3 songs the First Lady had chosen to honor the occasion. They would stroll out. The president would get up and say, "We've had a great dinner. This has been a wonderful night. Now let's go see some world quality entertainment in the East Room. Please follow me down the hall." From the time the president walked in, white wine poured, introductory speeches, first courses, main course wine, main course salad, dessert wine, dessert, strolling strings, and let's walk. We were given 55 minutes for the entire meal.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you. Love that reaction. That's what I get from everybody's eyes. I couldn't get a waiter at Chandon and take an order in 55 minutes.
No.
So you got to change your whole perspective. Think of a red wine that has potentially 3 minutes to show inequality before it's starting to be consumed. So all of those things factored into the decisions. We tried to introduce new varietals, well, not tried, we did very, very well, but we introduced new varietals that were coming out in our country, new viticultural areas. No country in the world has the range of viticultural areas we have. I probably served, my last recollection was 19 different states. Each state, maybe not a great reputation, but has a certain winemaker, found a location, a variety, and technique that produced a really stunning wine. If I can serve something from New Mexico, Colorado, Idaho, Massachusetts, North Carolina, people start to see the greatness of our country and our viticultural experience. It would have been easy just to stay California, Oregon, and Washington, but that's not who we are as a country. So all of these factors I was learning play into it.
Yeah, gosh. But you know, Daniel, it really does come back after all to the guest, to the comfort of the guest. And so
Absolutely.
and maybe in the end, no one really remembers whether the food and wine pairing was exactly perfect, but everybody remembers what they felt like, how they were treated. You know, service is so, you know, we don't think about that nearly enough. I've been meaning to ask you this though. Does the White House buy its wine?
Yes, yes. And just go back to your last point, just part, when you're talking about the homogeneousness of the whole experience, that is our whole definition of what we do. Every single part of it. And I think at Chandon, that was our initial concept. Every single part of the experience has to be compatible to each other. So when people leave, they go, something wonderful happened, but they don't exactly know why. That's really, to me, a mark of it. Yes, we do. It is a long-held standard there. We could accept donations, but to accept donations, you put in an implied favoritism towards reciprocation of some sort. That's human nature. Also, because of the prestige of the White House, we would have wineries from all over the country forwarding wine to us in an unbidden manner, most of which would not fulfill the narrow characteristics of what we're looking for to match that moment. And then we have all this wine left, feeling bad for people that were so gracious. And instinctively, the same way I would have felt if I hadn't got the offer, if their wines aren't chosen, there's a sense of disappointment. So there's a net loss. We could not afford that. That's not what the White House does. So we would reach out to a winery. We would ask for wholesale costs. They were very gracious about that. And we would then bring the wines in to a very small, indistinct, narrow wine cellar.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the wine cellar. But first, before we talk about the wine cellar,
Yeah.
I understand that since the Carter administration, the wines have indeed been American, and you just named 10 different states where wines might be from. Is that an official policy, or did that just kind of happen in the sort of, I'm thinking in the wake of the Nixon years? He was so famous, of course, for drinking French wine.
A number of answers. You're asking me questions, you're going to get answers, because I really love the time I was there, and I know people enjoy listening to it. There is no official policy on dining at the White House, because the only officialness is that there's a religious aspect to it. Let's say the Israeli delegations coming in, or the Moroccans, and there's a religious aspect to the government of the country. We recognize that. Other than that, other than the social protocol, each new family coming in, just like decorating upstairs in the residence, they have the option to do exactly what they want to do. They do tend to follow the past families because they're so involved with making sure it's done right and correctly that they don't want to upset the apple cart too big. I think with Carter, he just had a nationalist tendency towards it, and followed it up with Reagan, of course, who with Mr. Devers was heavily towards the California aspect and really started bringing in some great wines. And then after that, with David Berkeley doing it, and then my following, there seemed to be no reason not to follow that practice. It was just logical. There was a king of Spain coming for dinner, and I saw a wine person, bless his heart, say, well, why didn't you serve him a great Rioja? It's like, that's his home. Why would we do that? That makes no sense. Are you saying we don't have a wine in the country that could have amplified the quality that he would have with a great Rioja, but give him a new experience? So those are the things we face. It's a constant, not a battle, but it's a challenge to understand how people are going to accept it as far as the public perception of every wine you're choosing.
Yes. Well, if you think about it in reverse, of course, if you went to a very formal dinner in Spain and someone served you a California wine, you'd be disappointed, right? You go to a country wanting to experience that country culturally. So the White House cellar, I understand, is actually pretty small. It doesn't have that many bottles.
Can I add one small thing? We do try to give that sort of recognition wherever we can. If another country is coming in, whether it's a working lunch or a meal or a state formal occasion, if there's some tie we can bind something we produced in this country to people and culture that came from that country, then the president sitting at the table telling his guests, we have your people that moved to this country are doing what they did at home here. This is what they do with what we have. Everything at the White House is designed to tie together. It's all theater. It's called dinner, but it's all theater. The colors have a certain concept. The floors, the linens have a certain concept. The chef will look at the food products another country uses, choose those food products, but do it in our style. And then we put together information about it, forward it to the social secretary, who forwards it to the first family. And if they want to use it as talking points, everybody's better for it.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So the cellar itself is, I understand, fairly small.
Think of a broom closet on steroids. When I was going and I'm envisioning Jefferson cellars and the history of Jefferson choosing wine, and figured I would see all these great wines. It took me about 3 days before Gary took me down to the wine cellar in the storeroom area. And it literally was this unmarked door, which you opened, and it's probably 5 feet by maybe 18, if I'm being generous. And every wine we possessed was in that room. Now, the wines we do at banquets or receptions, that are a larger quantity, we always rotate a house white on the bar. I introduced serving a red wine at the bar, and of course we always have sparkling wine, and then there's our back bar items. They're kept at a National Park Service facility out in Riverdale, Maryland, right outside of the DC area, and we bring it in as needed. But for each specific event, we order for each specific event. So I went down there, and on one wall were the red wines, much too warm, and on another wall were the white wines, you know, not cold. It just was, people weren't being knowledgeable about it. And at the White House, there is no space. You're so mitigated by the space you have, that's all you're going to get. So we worked out practices to develop to make sure that the red wines didn't come out too cold by the time of service. There was a butler we appointed to be the wine knowledgeable person that would take that, make sure the white wines are chilled properly, not ice cold, and just take care of those things. But yeah, there's no storage.
Wow.
What I did do to cheat on that a little bit, where we say would have ordered 3 courses for a state dinner of a specific wine, I accidentally ordered 4. Well, that means I was left over with a case, which I then would put in that narrow little cellar, knowing that presidents 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the road, when they're having a small dinner in the residence that was important, I could then pull a couple of bottles out and show them something that's a little more what we would like to think of as developed. But I'm going to add one more point here too. I was aghast to think of serving newly released wines when I first got there. And I saw these puppies coming in that are beautiful wines, but they're just waiting to understand themselves. And it seemed very weird to me, having come from the restaurant background, where you would sit down with 4 people and enjoy a perfectly aged bottle of wine with subtlety and nuance. Again, if you go back to what I said about the table, it is so wired and so electric that sometimes those younger wines actually fit the occasion better. They have the gravity, taste, the complexity, the volume that matches somebody who's just sitting there eyes wide open grabbing the table. Now, that's not used as an excuse, but I found that it actually helped a little bit. Because if you were to serve that perfectly aged 58 Martini Cabernet, in that environment, it would have come across as warm water without definition. So again, going back to our role as wine professionals, it's not the wine you choose, it's the moment and the time that the wine was chosen for.
Daniel, that is so beautifully said.
It became a fun game, but by doing that, I was also able then to feature all these new viticultural areas that were coming up and new varieties. Doing Syrah, Viognier, Petit Manseng, things that had never been seen at the White House before. If all I did was bring it out of cellar, it would have been years down the road.
Yeah.
So I talk a lot, but I loved what I did.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much. This is so fascinating. And the rest of our interview with Daniel Shanks appears on the People to Know page. Check it out. You will not want to miss this. Again, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure, Karen.